With Australia facing a recession, and it's pretty clear that's where we're headed, with more interest rate rises on the horizon, probably 2 more, for some odd reason, the new government, the Albanese government, are going to make it harder, not easier, harder for young backpackers to visit Australia and provide much needed labour, especially in the bush. Now, farmers, regional towns, cafes, pubs rely on youngsters from places like the UK and Canada, India, China, the US, you name it, to come and spend a couple of years working in those sorts of jobs. Jobs often that Australians don't want to do. I mean, particularly those delivery riders who deliver food to people who are too lazy to go out and get it themselves. So what are we going to do to make this happen? Well, we're going to jack up their visa cost to $640. That was reported in the Australian today. And there's even talk of limiting their time allowed to be here in the country to just 1 year on a visa. Why would the government do that? Let's get the opposition's view. Shadow Immigration Minister Dan Tehan, who does a great job, joins us. Dan, I'll get your thoughts in a moment on what the government did with that equipment to Ukraine, but why are they wanting to up the cost of this visa and limit it to 1 year? What's the thinking behind it?
Well, it's a very good question, Chris. What does Anthony Albanese have against backpackers? I mean, they've come here, they've spent money for decades, $3 billion worth. They provide 80% of the fruit pickers in this nation. And the only reason that I can think of, it must be something to do with the unions. We know that the Labor government are going to bring in 1.5 million people over the next 5 years, and yet these backpackers who come in, do these jobs and then go, don't seem to be welcome. They seem to want everyone here permanently and not give these young people the opportunity to come here to work, to have fun, enjoy Australia, and then go home. It doesn't make any sense. And Anthony Albanese needs to answer the question, why doesn't he like backpackers? Why is he jacking this fee up? It's the highest visa for a backpacker in the world now. And also he needs to answer the question, is he going to limit backpackers to 1 year? As your listeners would know, the second year, if you're going to take that second year up as a backpacker, you have to spend 88 days in regional and rural Australia, which means you go out there and work. It's fantastic for our tourist towns. It's fantastic for our farmers. So why Anthony Albanese is doing this? The only answer I have is it's the unions, because they seem to want everyone here permanently, and they want those 1.5 million here permanently rather than the backpackers who can come and go.
Well, of course, Dan, the union doesn't have any control over a mobile workforce such as the backpackers, and so not getting paid union fees, and that might be the answer to this. But if you go to any regional town, and you're in Western Victoria, as we know, there's signs in every window that people are desperate for staff. Now, that's not even to think about fruit picking and jobs like that. So the only other thing I can think of is the government is going to up the number of permanent migrants into the country. Are they somehow perhaps saying, well, we want to give those jobs to migrants that come into Australia rather than transitory backpackers?
Well, that may be a clue to it. We know, though, that doesn't work. The great thing about the backpackers, they come for an experience and they're prepared to try anything. They'll go and they'll pick the fruit, whether it's mangoes in the Northern Territory, whether it's bananas in Queensland. They work on dairy farms down here in Western Victoria and do an outstanding job. So we just can't understand what the government is doing. It's one of those many decisions that we've seen when it comes to immigration, that there's just more questions than there is answers. For instance, why, when you've got a housing crisis, a rental crisis, when you're cutting road infrastructure funding and rail infrastructure funding, would you allow 1.5 million people in here this year and over the next 4 years? Why would you start dismantling Operation Sovereign Borders when We know that that's worked and it's done the job. And now we've got this with backpackers. There's a number of questions in the immigration space that we just don't have any answers to. And Anthony Albanese seems to be just doing what Labor always does when it comes to immigration, and that's make an unholy mess. They did it when we had Rudd and Gillard and Rudd, and now we seem to be doing it again with Albanese. And if we're not careful, we're going to see immigration in this nation causing us all sorts of problems because they're not doing it in the national interest.
I wonder if the PM and the relevant minister understand that, you know, we run around the world doing these trade deals, and you've been involved in some of those as well. What happens if the UK suddenly says, OK, if you're going to jack up the backpacker rate on our backpackers, we'll do it to you? I mean, it's very easy for other countries to say, no, we won't, we'll wrap up the visa costs on you. And the other thing that happens, of course, Dan, as you know, the German backpackers, the South Americans in particular, we've got a lot of South Americans here, they'll just go to New Zealand. It'll be easier.
That's exactly right, Chris. The backpackers, they look and they see what's available. They see how much it's going to cost them. And remember, there's cost of living crisis not only here in Australia but elsewhere around the world. So they look at the price of the visa, and as importantly, they look at how long you can stay. Now, if the government, as has been recommended to them by their own review, cuts the length of time to 1 year, that will really hurt the choice that the backpacker makes when he's deciding whether they should come to Australia or New Zealand, the US, Canada, to Europe. So this is seriously playing with a $3 billion industry to our economy that provides incredibly important workforce. Can you think that if we didn't have the backpackers here in the numbers that they are at the moment, what that would mean in terms of fruit being picked, in terms of vegetables being picked, and what it would do to the cost of the supermarket? So while we're going through this cost of living crisis, they'll be making decisions that are making it worse. Once again, it just doesn't make any sense.